On the first night of the Christmas market, Lena noticed there were more lights in the square than last year. The city put up the same brochure every December, same map, same neat rows of stalls, but the square felt slightly longer, as if the cobblestones had grown an extra stretch of street overnight.
She stood at the edge of the market with her thermos of tea, watching families move through steam and fairy lights, spart and paper cups turning them into ghosts with shopping bags.
Her job was simple. She worked for the municipal office and stayed late to make sure the generators didn't cut out and no one unplugged the cameras. The city liked its footage of happy crowds that made good promotional clips the rest of the year. Usually Lena just watched the screens for a few hours, logged any incidents, and went home to her small apartment in quieter lights. But this year, when she walked the perimeter before heading into the control shed, she counted 32 stalls instead of 31. The extra stall sat at the very end of the far row, where the square usually thinned into ordinary pavement and parked cars. It was narrower than the others, like someone had folded it inward to make space. Its roof a little too steep, its sign blank. No vendor name, no menu, no cheerful branding, just a wash of warm white lights that didn't quite match the rest. Inside, she saw shelves of glass ornaments, each one the size of a small apple, their surfaces clouded like frozen breath on a window. A figure stood behind the counter, tall and wrapped in a dark coat, hands gloved despite the little heater at their feet. A small sign appeared on the counter as she drew closer, inked in careful, old-fashioned letters. Custom memories, it read. One per customer. Lena snorted under her breath, assuming it was another Instagram gimmick, and went to the control shed as the hour ticked toward 8. The security shed was little more than a container with heaters, stale coffee, and 6 monitors stacked in a 2x3 grid. On screen, the market looked almost unreal, compressed, fish-eyed. The crowds bent into arcs of light and color. She found the camera aimed down the far row and zoomed in on the new stall. On the feed, the blank sign above it now showed a name, letters too small to read at the first zoom level. She zoomed in further until the pixels broke apart and the words resolved through the blur. Still open, the sign said, in letters that exactly matched her own handwriting from the notes she left for herself on her fridge. She leaned back in her chair, the plastic creaking, and looked at the live feed of herself in the reflection of the monitor. For a few minutes she told herself it was a coincidence of style and angle, a trick of grainy resolution. Then the loudspeakers in the square clicked softly, the way they did before the pre-recorded announcements. A calm female voice spread through the snow and lights, smooth and civic and familiar.
Thank you for visiting the Old Town Christmas Market. It began exactly as it always did. Please keep your children close, mind the steps, and remember that the market closes at 10 o'clock.
Lena relaxed until the announcement kept going past the point where the recording usually ended.
And if you find yourself at a stall that is not on your map, the voice added, please do not buy anything with your name on it.
The last sentence came through softer, as if the speakers weren't sure they were supposed to carry it. Lena flipped through the control panel's announcement list, but the warning wasn't in any of the files. On camera, the extra stall at the end of the row seemed a little busier now. People drifted toward it between sips of mulled wine and bites of gingerbread, drawn not by any big signage but by something quieter. On the monitors, she watched a woman pick up one of the cloudy ornaments, turn it, and go abruptly still. The glass cleared as she held it, revealing a tiny moving scene inside, a living room, a man and child decorating a tree, a gap where she should have been standing. Lena could see the woman's shoulders jerk, the way her breath stopped, even without audio. The vendor leaned forward and said something, head angled in a politely listening pose. The woman mouthed a word Lena recognized even from far away, please. The vendor nodded and wrapped the ornament in paper. On the underside of the ornament, just before it vanished into the folds, Lena saw 3 letters etched into the glass. The woman's initials. Lena grabbed her coat and stepped back out into the market, her breath punching out in little ghosts of steam. The noise outside felt slightly damped, as if the air were thicker between her and the crowd than between the crowd and itself. She walked the row of stalls, passing familiar faces and familiar goods, candles, wool scarves, carved toys, sugared nuts. When she reached the end of the row, there was only the low iron railing and the street beyond. No extra stall, no blank sign, just a patch of slush where footprints turned back. On the nearest lamppost, a small city map of the market showed 31 stalls, numbered in red. The far corner was blank on paper where the stall had stood on the screen. She looked back toward the square's center, where the big public Christmas tree towered over the crowd. From here, she should have been able to see the strange narrow stall peeking from behind its neighbors. She saw only the usual wooden booths and strings of lights sagging under fresh snow. Back in the shed, the camera still showed the extra stall, busy as ever. She watched a teenager approach the counter, cheeks pink from the cold and eyes bright with whatever he hadn't yet learned to be afraid of. He picked up an ornament and laughed, pointing at the scene inside. In the tiny glass, Lena saw the inside of a bus at night, the boy sitting by the window, earbuds in, snow pressing against the glass like a second, wider world. He handed over money, still smiling, and slipped the ornament into his pocket as if it were nothing special. On the stall's counter, a ledger turned a page by itself. The vendor wrote something with a fountain pen that shone too dark in the camera's grayscale feed. The teenager left frame, walking toward the end of the row. He did not appear on the camera covering the exit. Lena checked the feed twice, then 3 times, scrubbing backward in jittery fast forward. On one screen, he walked away from the stall and out of frame. On the other, the space where he should have emerged stayed stubbornly filled with strangers who never looked his way. Somewhere outside, the announcer's voice came back, softer now, almost underneath the music.
Market closes at 10, she reminded them. Some of you will stay longer than that.
Lena opened the folder of old incident reports in the desk drawer, suddenly remembering something she had half read last winter. 2 years ago, there had been a small note at the bottom of a snowstorm report, parent complaining that their child had come home talking about a stall that did not exist. The child had described glass baubles that showed tomorrow, and a seller who knew their name without being told. Lana closed the folder slowly. On the monitors, the extra stalls line grew shorter as the hour crept toward closing. People who left it often walked away alone, even if they had approached it with someone at their side. Sometimes the missing half of a pair reappeared from another aisle, blinking, hands empty. Sometimes they simply did not appear again that night in any of the cameras. Lena printed the current map of the market and began to draw the extra stall onto the blank corner at the end of the row. Her pen snagged on the paper and left a dark blot like a tiny burned hole. The stall on the monitor flickered, then sharpened as if pleased to be acknowledged. The vendor looked up directly at the camera for the first time. Their face was strangely smooth in the low resolution, neither young nor old, eyes catching the light in a way that made them look flat and reflective. They smiled the way people smile when someone finally says their name correctly. Over the square speakers, another announcement began without her pressing play.
Last chance to visit every stall, the familiar voice said. Last chance to leave with only what you brought.
Lena realized that somewhere between checking the generators and watching the monitors, she had stopped hearing curls entirely. The market below still moved in time to something, but whatever the soundtrack was now, it lived only in the cameras. On the screen, the extra stall sign had changed again. This time it read, "Open late." "Lena, you're due." Her mouth went dry at the same moment her phone buzzed in her pocket. The caller ID said home, though she lived alone and had never labeled any number that way. Without thinking, she answered. The sound that came through wasn't a voice at first. It was the layered ambience of the market. Laughter, the hiss of snow, footsteps over wet stone. Underneath it, like a second track slowly fading in, a child's choir sang the word Lena on a rising scale.
Come see what you could have had, a small voice whispered over the melody.
On the monitor, the vendor at the extra stall looked up again, as if hearing the same call. They set one ornament gently on the counter, separate from the rest. Even through compressed pixels, she could see her own living room inside it, her couch, her half-finished book, the empty space where another armchair might have been. Under the scene, etched too small for any of the customers to read but perfectly centered for the camera, were the words, "What you didn't ask for." She realized, with a dull coldness, that the stall wasn't selling the past. It was selling the lives people almost had, the ones that flickered in the space between decisions. The ledger on the counter filled those spaces in with ink. Outside, the clock in the square chimed 10. On all the monitors, the market lights dimmed as vendors closed their shutters and rolled their tarps down. On one screen, the extra stall stayed bright. Its sign no longer said "Still open" or "Lena, you're due." It simply said "Back tomorrow" in handwriting that looked like no one's and everyone's at once. Her phone call ended without a click. In the headset hanging on its hook, she could hear the faintest trace of ongoing market noise, as if the night below had not actually closed. Lena printed the footage of the extra stalls feed onto still frames and pinned one to the inside wall of the shed. On paper, the space where the vendor's face should be had developed as a blank white glare. The shelves of ornaments, though, were crystal clear. In one of them, she could just make out a tiny version of herself, sitting under a Christmas tree that wasn't hers, laughing at a joke she had never heard. The next night, the brochure still said 31 stalls. The city still paid her to sit in the shed and watch the feeds. And down at the far end of the far row, on the monitor only, the market had quietly added one more stall again. Somewhere in the ledger on its counter, a line waited blank for the next person who wondered, just for a second, what their life would have been if they had chosen differently last Christmas. On the night the snow finally smothered the city, Max left the TV on just for the company of other people's noise. Outside, the wind had the steady, angry pitch of a kettle that never quite boils, pushing snow against the glass until the world beyond his window was just a moving white curtain. Inside, his radiator clanked and hissed like it was trying to keep up with a job it hadn't trained for. The city had sent out a dozen warnings: stay inside, avoid travel, keep devices charged, check on neighbors if you could reach them without leaving your building. Max's building was the kind of post-war block that looked tired even on sunny days, but tonight the snow made it seem half erased from the world.
He had work emails open on his laptop, but his eyes kept drifting to the muted commercials on TV, a loop of impossible warm places and happy, dry people.
When the crawl at the bottom of the screen changed from car lease deals to an emergency advisory banner, he turned the volume up. The usual emergency tone bleated, that two-note rising and falling sound that made your nerves straighten even if you weren't really listening.
This is a service announcement regarding the ongoing snow event, a calm woman's voice said, overlaying the image of a radar map smeared in blue and white. Residents are advised to remain indoors. Do not attempt to travel by car or foot. Road visibility is near zero and emergency services are delayed.
Max half listened as he topped up his mug with instant coffee, the powdered kind that always tasted slightly of cardboard and nostalgia. He had grown up with these announcements in the background of his winters, a kind of weather liturgy that said, "We are watching the sky for you." Tonight, the familiar voice felt closer somehow, clearer, like the announcer had moved from his studio to the far end of his own hallway.
Additional localized advisories will follow for specific districts, the woman said. Please do not ignore guidance that applies directly to your building, your street, or your floor.
Max frowned and went back to the couch, balancing his mug carefully. A new graphic slid onto the screen, a simple list of neighborhoods and block numbers. At first it was just names he recognized but didn't live in, places across the river, suburbs beyond the Beltway. Then he saw his district header flicker onto the banner.
Old North Side, the announcer read. Advisory for residents in buildings with internal hallways and shared stairwells.
Max's skin prickled. That described basically every building in his neighborhood, but still.
Residents are advised not to open doors to any persons requesting entry to the building after 22:30, the voice continued. Visitors and couriers have been instructed to suspend service. Emergency services will identify themselves by full name and unit.
He glanced at the digital clock on his microwave reflected in the dark window. It was 21:48. The lights in his building flickered once, dimming just enough to make the shadows deepen, then steadied again. The announcer's tone shifted almost imperceptibly, the way voices do when they lean in closer to a microphone.
Localized guidance now for residents in Building 47B, she said.
Max sat up straighter. His mail always came as delivered because half the street forgot the B. His building number appeared in plain white text at the bottom of the screen, overlaid on drone footage of a snow-covered city.
Residents of 47B are advised to remain inside their units between the hours of 22:30 and 0300, the announcer said. Please do not open your apartment doors to investigate noises in the hallway or stairwell during this time.
Max's hallway was always noisy, neighbors shouting down to each other, someone dragging furniture at midnight, kids thundering up and down stairs, but tonight he was suddenly aware of the silence out there.
For your safety, the voice added, any knocks or voices at your door between 22:30 and 0300 should be treated as non-human in origin.
Max's coffee went sour in his stomach. He grabbed the remote to rewind, wondering if he had misheard, but the playback controls were grayed out. The broadcast logo in the corner looked correct, the emergency banner official and crisp. The announcer moved on to another district as if nothing strange had been said at all. Max muted the TV and sat there listening to his building breathe. Pipes ticked. The fridge hummed. Somewhere below, someone coughed. In the hallway, nothing moved. He checked the time again. 22:06. It was stupid to change behavior because of one sentence in a broadcast, he told himself, but the voice hadn't sounded like a joke, or a glitch, or a prank hack. It had sounded like a nurse talking to a patient who needed things explained carefully. He locked his front door even though it was already locked, sliding the deadbolt with a small, decisive click. The snow outside thickened until the window was just a glowing white rectangle, no depth, no distance. At 22:29, the power went out. The darkness was immediate and complete, the kind that made sound bigger. Max's phone screen lit his hand in a little oblong of cold blue. He checked the time on instinct. 22:30 exactly. In the hallway, something knocked. It was not a polite tap or a frantic pounding, but a single, measured hit like someone testing the thickness of the door with their knuckles. Max froze with his phone halfway back to his pocket. He told himself it could be a neighbor, someone frightened by the blackout, someone forgetting the time. Then he remembered the exact phrasing, any knocks or voices at your door between 22:30 and 0300 should be treated as non-human in origin.
Max, a voice said, muffled through the wood. Hey man, you home?
It sounded like his upstairs neighbor, Igor, right down to the slight rasp from too many cigarettes. The neighbor who never remembered his rent on time, who once borrowed a pan and returned it months later with a new dent in it. But Igor always called him bro, never Max.
You saw the alert, right? The voice continued. They said we should check on each other.
Max swallowed and said nothing. The knock came again, exactly the same as before.
Come on, Max. I can see your light on.
His phone screen was the only light in the room. The TV, unplugged by the outage, sat as a dead black rectangle. On its dark surface, faint and greenish, the emergency banner crawled on with no power at all. Building 47B, the ghost text read, do not acknowledge hallway voices. The thing outside his door sighed once, like a disappointed friend, and its footsteps moved away down the hall. Except the corridor floorboards did not creak under its weight. Max stayed standing in the dark until his legs shook from the effort. Somewhere far off in the blizzard, a siren wound up and choked out. At 23:02, the power surged back on. The TV jumped back to life mid-broadcast, no startup logo, no channel identification. On the screen was a live feed of his own building's stairwell. The camera angle was from above, looking down over the railings as snow-damp air slid in through the ground floor door. The announcer's voice returned, softer now, as if not meant for every listener.
Residents of 47B, she said, please remain calm. You may hear attempts to imitate familiar speech patterns. Do not assist these signals in refining their impersonations.
The stairwell feed showed no one on the steps, just melting snow and the slow drip of water onto concrete. On the 8th step, where Igor usually paused to catch his breath, dark moisture spread in a boot shape, but there were no boots in sight. Max's phone vibrated with a new notification even though his service icon still said no signal. Emergency broadcast chat, the banner read. There was no such app installed. He opened it anyway. A single message waited inside, stamped with the same logo as the TV broadcast. Do not say hello, it read. Do not confirm your name. Under that, typing dots appeared as if someone on the other end were composing more advice. On the TV, another hallway appeared, this one not his, different paint, different doors, but the same voice narrated over it.
Some buildings, the announcer said, have more doors than residents. These doors attempt to correct that imbalance.
Max realized with a small internal flinch that he had never bothered to count how many doors were on his floor. He had a mental picture of 5, including the stairwell door. He no longer trusted that picture. The chat on his phone updated. If IT uses your full name, do not give IT anything else. The new message read. Think of nothing you would miss. On the TV, the announcer's voice sounded more distant now, as if coming down a long tiled tunnel.
We remind all residents that snow is an effective medium for carrying certain signal types, she said. You may hear it trying out new pronunciations of you.
Max's building groaned as the wind shoved against it. In the pipes under his floor, something like words bubbled and died. At 0014, someone pounded on the door across the hall. Max's phone lit up before his fear fully formed. Another message arriving from the impossible chat. Do not pity the wrong voices, it said. The TV showed a different apartment now, one with expensive furniture and big windows, a woman pressing her ear against her door. Through her door, a child's crying bled in, rising and falling like wind through a flute.
Please, someone help me, the child sobbed on the broadcast.
On the bottom of the screen, red text scrolled. The child does not live there, it said. Do not open. The woman on the screen opened her door anyway. There was nothing in the hallway but a long, low, rushing sound like every ventilation shaft in the building inhaling at once. The feed cut abruptly to static. Max realized he was gripping his mug so hard his hand hurt. The power flickered again. For 3 seconds, everything in his apartment went black. In those 3 seconds, something knocked on his door 12 times. When the lights came back, the TV no longer showed the emergency channel. It showed his own front door from the other side. The camera angle was too close, as if the lens were pressed only inches from the peephole. Max stared at the screen, then at his physical door, then back again. Inside the chat, a final message appeared. We can hold IT in the hallway until 0300, it said. After that, IT will know you stopped listening. On the TV, something heavy leaned against his door from the other side, bowing the wood inward by a millimeter. The announcer's voice spoke one last time, directly over the image of his own entrance.
Residents of 47B, she said calmly. If you must give it anything, give it something you won't need tomorrow.
Max thought of his job, his phone, his aging couch, the mug in his hand, his leftover sense of humor about all of this. He thought of the last winter he had not spent alone. He placed his palm flat against the inside of the door. On the TV, a slightly translucent copy of his handprint appeared on the outside surface, fingers longer, lines deeper. He closed his eyes and tried very hard to think of nothing at all. Snow battered the window like static turned up too high. In the stairwell, something that had almost learned his name whispered the wrong syllables to itself until the clock on his phone finally slipped from 0259 to 0300. The pressure against his door eased, leaving the wood unmarked. The TV snapped back to a late-night talk show with canned laughter and nothing on the screen about weather at all. His phone unlocked itself with a small buzz and the emergency chat disappeared from his app list as if it had never been there. In the morning, the city would send out a recap of the storm, mentioning power outages and heroic plow drivers and nothing at all about hallway voices. Max would count the doors on his floor and find that there were exactly 5, just as he had always thought. But once in a while, on nights when the snow came back and the wind pitched itself against the building, he would wake up sure that somewhere between the stairwell and his door, there was briefly room for a 6. And if he turned the TV on during those hours, No matter what channel he chose, the emergency call would already be waiting at the bottom of the screen, politely reminding Building 47B not to answer their names. On Christmas Eve, when the rest of the city glittered under strings of lights and frozen breath, Lena was stuck on the late shift at the 24-hour supermarket. Outside, snow fell in thick, slanting sheets, turning the parking lot into a blank white field broken only by a few abandoned carts. Inside, the Christmas playlist looped the same cheerful song she had heard since November, all bells and choirs and smiling voices that never needed a break. At 22:00, the manager clocked out, wished her a half-serious Merry Christmas, and left her alone with humming refrigerators and fluorescent hum. "You close at midnight, right?" she had asked as he shrugged to his scarf. He had paused in the doorway, snow blowing in around his boots, and frowned slightly. "Only if the storm gets worse," he said. "If not, we stick to 24/7. The system knows what to do. The announcements will tell you." Lena hated when he said the system like it was a person she should already trust. The store used a pre-recorded announcement network that chimed gently before a woman's voice told customers about sales, closing hours, and abandoned carts. Tonight, the system hummed quietly in the background, waiting for scheduled messages. For the first 2 hours, everything was normal in the way night shifts are normal, which is to say slightly too empty, slightly too echoing, slightly too aware of its own silence.
A couple arguing quietly over wine. A man buying frozen pizza and nothing else. Someone in a heavy coat who kept circling the holiday aisle and never picking anything up.
By 23:30, the world outside the glass doors was just white noise, the storm smearing out the parking lot lights until they looked like distant ships in fog. The last visible taillights disappeared into the snow, leaving Lena with a row of empty checkout lanes that looked like idle mouths. At 23:47, the chime sounded for the first time, then bombed.
Dear customers, the PA voice said, warm and bright. Due to severe weather conditions, this location will close at midnight. Please make your final selections and proceed to the checkout. We wish you a safe and happy holiday.
Lena exhaled, relief loosening the knot between her shoulders. She liked the idea of the storm excusing the store from its promise to never sleep. At 23:55, the same chime sounded again, then bombed.
Dear customers, the voice repeated. Due to severe weather conditions, this location will close at midnight.
Lena frowned at the ceiling. It wasn't unusual for the announcements to repeat, but usually they cycled through different messages about sales and loyalty cards. She checked the front of the store again. The last customer had left 10 minutes ago. The automatic doors were locked, little red lights glowing above the sensors.
Snow was now piled halfway up the glass outside, pressing in like someone resting their whole weight against the building.
At 00:00, nothing happened. The lights stayed on. The refrigerators hummed. The Christmas music started a new loop like a toy wound too tight. Lena waited for the system to announce that the store was now closed, for some official phrase about locking doors and thanking guests. Instead, the chime sounded a third time, then bombed.
Dear customer, the voice said.
It had dropped the plural. Lena felt the hairs lift at the back of her neck.
Due to severe weather conditions, this location will close at midnight, the voice said again.
The clock behind the service desk read 00:03. Lena reached for the phone to call her manager, but the line out of the store gave only a thin ribbon of static. When she hung up, the music stopped mid-sleigh bell. For a moment there was only the hum of the lights. Then another chime, slightly out of tune, then bombed.
Lena, the voice said.
Her name slid through the air like warm breath in cold air, visible only in the way her muscles locked. She was almost sure the system didn't have her name recorded anywhere.
Dear customer, Lena, the voice corrected itself. Due to severe weather conditions, this location will close at midnight.
She looked up at the speaker above register 3, half expecting to see a mouth behind the grill. The clock now read 00:09. She walked to the front doors and peered out through the pressed snow. There were no cars, no plows, no streetlights visible beyond the fog of white. It felt less like weather now and more like distance, as if the parking lot had simply been erased. The chime followed her to the door like a tiny, obedient animal. Then pawned.
Lena, the voice said again. Please return to aisle 12.
Her stomach tightened because aisle 12 was seasonal. Trees, wrapping paper, advent calendars with smiling cartoon faces. She had spent the first weeks of December stacking them into neat walls of days waiting to be open. Now the system wanted her there. For a stupid second, she almost obeyed automatically, the way you follow a boarding call in an airport. Instead, she tested something. She stayed exactly where she was, at the doors, and whispered no. The store lights dimmed as if she had offended them personally. For several long seconds, there was no sound at all. Then a different chime, lower, wrong, like a reversed bell. Lon bang.
Due to severe weather conditions, this location will close at midnight, the voice said again, but each word dragged a fraction of a second behind the last, as if buffering.
Midnight was gone, though. The moment had passed and not taken anything with it. Lena walked to aisle 12 because not knowing felt worse than obeying. Halfway down the row of ornaments and novelty candy, she stopped. The advent calendars had changed. When she had stacked them, each box had featured the same cartoon Santa face and numbered windows from 1 to 24. Now the boxes near the end of the row all had one extra window in the corner, small and unnumbered, like an afterthought. Through the thin cardboard door shape, she could see a printed peephole. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, though there was no one who would reasonably text her at this hour. She checked it anyway. A new notification slid down from the top of the screen. Store system, it said, with the supermarket's logo. Thank you for staying with us this holiday, Lena. The message read, time until closing, 0013. Her phone's system clock in the corner still reads 0023. On the ceiling, the chime sounded again, now with a faint jingle of sleigh bells woven underneath like static.
Please proceed to your designated door, the voice said, cheerful again. Customers will be closed individually to ensure safety.
Lena stared at the advent calendar with the unnumbered door.
We wish you a peaceful night, the voice added.
In the far end of aisle 12, beyond the tinsel and plastic wreaths, a real door waited that she had never seen before. It was narrow, exactly the width of a person if they turned sideways, painted the same off-white as the shelves, as if it had always been there and she had just failed to notice. On its surface, at eye level, someone had bolted a little brass frame where a number should go. The frame was empty, waiting. Her phone buzzed again. Input name for door, said the new prompt, cursor blinking in a text box. Underneath, smaller text asked, who stays open? Behind her, somewhere in the aisles, the Christmas music started again without instruments or lyrics, only choral voices humming a tune she had never heard before. They hummed her name into the melody, stretching the vowels until it almost fit the shape of a carol. She thought of typing someone else's name into the waiting field. Her manager, the man with the frozen pizza, the neighbor she only half liked. But the prompt pulsed faintly whenever her thumb rested anywhere near the L. Time until closing, 0001, the countdown whispered at the top of the screen. On the store clocks, it was already 0032. The choral humming rose, a gentle, insistent pressure in her ears.
Thank you for your patience, Lena, the overhead voice said, and this time it did not sound pre-recorded at all.
She typed 3 letters before she could stop herself. The brass frame on the door filled in from the inside with fog, resolving into matching letters pressed against the glass. She hit backspace, but the letters on the door did not vanish. Midnight reached, the phone declared, though no such time existed on any clock anymore. The narrow door at the end of aisle 12 unlatched with a small, decisive click from the other side.
Thank you for staying with us. Lena, the store said from every speaker at once. You will help us stay open.
When she stepped backward, the floor under her shoes hummed like a conveyor belt beginning to move. The aisle stretched slightly, gaining products she didn't remember shelving, brands she didn't recognize, labels in languages she couldn't read. On one new shelf, dozens of identical advent calendars stared back at her, each with the same blank, unnumbered door and the same brass frame waiting for more names. Outside, the snow erased the last outline of the store from the street, leaving only a low, humming shape under the drifts. In the years that followed, people would say that this location always looked open on Christmas Eve from a distance, its windows lit, its sign glowing, its parking lot clear. But anyone who pulled in closer would find only an empty, snow-packed lot and a locked glass door. If they pressed their face against the glass and cupped their hands to block the reflection, some swore they could see the lights still on inside, stretching endlessly back into more aisles than the building should hold. And if they waited long enough, over the faint hum of refrigeration and old carols, a warm, tired voice would thank them for their patience and offer them, very gently, a door with their name on it. Echo stories when stories whisper through the dark.